year. Hopefully not in the middle of crisis for crisis management. And we did a couple of those last year when there were certain extraordinary events. This is actually just ordinary course. I wanted to take the opportunity now that term is in to review some of the issues that we're dealing with. I had a great meeting with the LSA executive about a week and a half ago. They identified certain priorities and actually gave me a copy of the results of a survey that had been undertaken in early August of students about certain priorities. That sample size was not ideal. Only about 65 upper year students actually responded, so I know that they'll be undertaking a survey later on in the term. That's actually a good thing, because it'll give us an opportunity to gauge some responses about some of the things that we've been doing since, and actually overlapping with, the time that the survey was being undertaken, notably in career services. So I'm going to speak for about 20 minutes. We'll then move to some questions. We'll let you know when the additional pizza arrives so that people can feel free to go back and forth. One of the things, because we are recording this and my mic needs to be on my lapel at all times, if you have a question when we get to the question and answer period, I'm going to have to literally repeat it, so that way it's actually captured for the camera. So if you can work with me on that, will be great. For those of you who are new to the faculty, one of the things you missed last year was, frankly, a full-on discussion for a couple of months about tuition policy, and what was happening with the faculty. It's nice to be able to breathe this year, but what I want to do and start off with is a bit of a recap of some of those issues, because they very directly affect the future of the faculty. And while we're not entirely out of the woods yet, and there is a provincial budget coming in October about which there is some concern, I think we're in a much better place. So here's the history of what's been happening with this faculty prior to last year. The provincial government had promised 2% funding increases, and then in March 2013 there was an announcement very suddenly, and apparently caught a lot of people by surprise. Professor Spryzak is nodding his head, he lived through it, of a 7% cut. So it was a 9% swing in 1 year. That had a devastating impact on this faculty in terms of support staff, notably, because faculty and permanent staff are actually subject to collective agreements. We don't have any control over that. And so in terms of what the former administration had to do, the easiest thing was either to not replace people who were retiring, or where there was any kind of possibility for some sort of less reduced expenditure, they did that. The law library is controlled by Central now and actually closed during the summer months. I've been trying to work to change that. Our faculty's operating budget in real dollars was actually less than it was in 2009, 2010, or 2010, 2011. The number of full-time faculty had been reduced from 36.5 to 29 last year. We're down at 26 plus me, so it depends what you count me as. So about 27 this year. There have been staff reductions, and there was some concern about, both the faculty agreement and the staff agreement, collective agreement negotiations are still ongoing. Contracts had expired, negotiations are still underway, so we don't know the impact there. These are the numbers. One of the things that I actually have been doing a little differently here is being very open and transparent about totals where I can be, of course respecting confidentiality and all of those other requirements, but those were the real dollar amounts. So we're sitting just under a $6 million budget. For a faculty this size, that's actually, and one of the things I said when I was a dean candidate was, from the outside, without knowing the inside numbers, this place is woefully underfunded for the kinds of programs that it is offering and frankly should be offering. So I had long discussions with the LSA last year about what it would take. Because actually law students had supported a market modifier tuition increase back in 2009, 2010. So students had actually supported it at that stage. University of Calgary Faculty of Law got it, so their tuition went up to $12,500 six years ago. U of A's got frozen at 10. That also had a kind of double impact. And so I said, look, let's sit down and figure out what is it that would be your priorities, what's it going to take? So 5-year moratorium on 1L enrollment increases. Real concern about what had been happening in Ontario, what continues to happen in Ontario. The easiest way for increased revenue in a faculty? More bums and seats. So I had taught at Queen's between 2004 and 2008. At the time, class size was between 150 and 160. I understand they're at about 220 this year. That has a real impact with no real sort of additional complement. Also, as the economy's tightening, of course, that increases competition for jobs and strains resources. And so this was one of their priorities. there's this issue about tuition waivers that actually turned out to be more logistical than substantive, and I think we've got a fix for that. I'm hoping so. Some curriculum reform with strong emphasis on experiential learning. That is also one of my priorities, but I'll talk about that a little later as how we get there, because it's not an immediate fix, and I want to make sure we're doing thoughtfully and well in the context in which we're actually operating in Alberta. I was speaking yesterday at the Canadian Bar Association's Alberta Council meeting about some of these issues and about some of the proposals that are coming forward. They're on board. They want to help. And if we're actually trying to place students in sort of supervised arrangements during term, beyond just a simple clinic model, additional clinics are an easier way to do it in some respects. They're also far more expensive, and they tend not to reach as broad a population. I came from 6 years in Sacramento, which was seat of government in California, and we had great relationships with government, with regulatory agencies, where people could actually do placements during the term. You'd go in on a Friday and actually do a placement. The other thing that I want to make sure of as well is that we engage in a thoughtful dialogue with SLS about the role of SLS in experiential learning opportunities. I actually brought in Trevor Farrow from Osgoode last year. He's their associate dean and previously had responsibility for transitioning all of their experiential learning arrangements. So we're learning from some of the best models in Canada. We need to adapt it here. This was something that the SLS was actually focused on. Elimination of the faculty membership fee. This was a $50 a term fee that had actually been approved by students in a referendum back in 1997 to hire a career services officer. They didn't have one. So the students said, we need to pay for one. I said, this is ridiculous. They agreed. And then we had some back and forth because of the way in which the university governance system worked. You hopefully all got emails from me. We got it fixed eventually. If it showed up and you were billed for it, you're supposed to get it rebated. I hope that's all taken care of. So that was actually an accomplishment. Emphasis on mental health programming. And when the LSA had a referendum last year, they voted not only up or down on a tuition increase, but also on component parts. What are the student priorities? The number one priority of the students, hire more faculty, which actually aligns very much with the response from the recent LSA survey, which is fundamentally a complaint about the number of courses and the upper year options being offered. And I'll come back to talk about that. So that's what I agreed. I said a 4-year moratorium to 2017-18 because they were looking for that kind of proposal. I said tuition waiver payment, we'll figure that out. Experiential learning opportunities. The goal is by 2017-18 to expand it so that 20 to 25% of all law students at least have some experiential learning opportunity, whether for credit or non-credit, by that stage. And so we're consulting this year, hoping to expand some pilots next year, and then more full implementation by the year afterwards. More consultation, significant enhancement of career services, which I'm already underway on, and those of you in first year are seeing some of that directly, I hope, already. Elimination of the $50 fee, and then mental health support. So that was broad brush strokes what was there. These are all the numbers. This is still up on the market modifier side. I know that the numbers are sort of faint, but this is what was going to happen with tuition. So from 10,000, for those of the students who were in 2L and 3L, a 2,000 a year increase. So if you were in a 1L position last year, you paid 10. This year you'd pay 12. Next year you'd pay 14. For those students coming in, it was going to start at 16. It had a very substantial impact on our bottom line, and basically would take what they call differential fees from $2.3 million to 5.5. So basically I'd be taking a $6 million budget and adding it by 50, adding 50% to what we can do. These were some of the investments that we mapped out, including some of the things I haven't talked about. I'll come back to talking about mental health and wellness in particular. You'll see on that list a director, coordinator, and admin assistant for experiential learning. If we're going to do it right and well, it will take actually an academic director. It will take office staff to coordinate it and to make sure that the placements are supervised and facilitated. So I said, let's benchmark against best practices in Canada and the US. What's it going to take to make sure that it works? I wanted another admissions officer, financial aid officer. I wanted additional scholarships and bursaries. I wanted 2 more career services officers. I want to keep the law library open. I wanted to get professors back to 2009 levels at a minimum. I'd like to go beyond that. UBC, with a comparable student body, and now a $20 or $25 million naming donation, that's the envy. That I know that it's on the sort of 7 deadly sins. Envy's not one of the good ones, but envy. In terms of what they've been able to do, they're also the beneficiaries of greater operating grants from the government of British Columbia. They have 47 faculty, plus minus, for a comparably sized student population of about 550. So that was the grand total of the new differential fees. There was $1 million shortfall. When I showed this slide to the firms downtown, they said, no doubt you're going to be looking to us for some support. And I said, you see the method in my madness. Okay, so I'll come back to development, I'll come back to some of the implementation, but let me talk to you a little bit about some trends that I'm watching very carefully, in particular for this faculty, but also more broadly on career services. So this is the arc of applications to the faculty. We're still very strong. Very, very strong. We've got 7 to 8 applications for every position. This year's LSAT and GPA numbers haven't been sort of finally published yet because we're still looking at early September withdrawals and people coming in. But by and large, I understand it's going to be about the same as before, which is a 161 LSAT and a 3.8 GPA, which is phenomenal. Had a conversation with somebody in the States this morning at a big name school. That was them envying us. You are phenomenally well qualified coming in and you're bringing incredible experiences. And so in that respect, at least, it makes it very easy for me to talk to firms about the kind of quality of student that's coming into and graduating from this faculty. We have very little attrition. And I'll post these slides later on. So, this is where our combination is. One of the things I wanted to be concerned about is what's happening to the first year class. What happens after first year? Is there something that we're doing right or wrong? There's going to be some natural attrition. People come to law school and find it's not for them. Some people, for personal reasons, family reasons, or otherwise, transfer elsewhere. We have transfers in as well. And so in that respect, at least, I have not gone aggressively. University of Toronto's done this for a while. They did it when I was at Queen's in 2004, 2005. They would actually look and wait until the first year dean's list was posted and then try and recruit them and actually snatch them away. And I had 2 of my students in that kind of capacity. My research assistant actually went to Toronto and then came back. He said he hated it, liked the Queen's community better and had a much better time. It was a bit of a wake-up call for him about how much he needed to do and how qualified, frankly, he was in that respect. So we're pretty good in this kind of context. This is another set of numbers that I'm watching really carefully and talking to not only career services, but talking to the firms about what's going on. These numbers are great. I'd say anything at 95% plus is, frankly, full employment. Because there's always going to be a couple individuals that, for whatever reason, idiosyncratic reasons about area or practice or otherwise, just aren't going to secure articles. So this is also a bit of a sign of the economy. 98.7% in 2013, 96 in 2014, so again, full employment. Of the 2015 students, 90% plus. So I'm a little concerned about some of that trajectory, and we're working hard. People are saying in terms of what's going on right now, 12 to 18 months until we get some certainty about what's happening with oil and gas, which has a very direct impact in Calgary and Edmonton to a lesser degree. What's interesting as well is where people are going. And this is something that actually, as we're retooling career services, you should be aware of in terms of certain trends. So we still place, and we've been ranked number 2 in Canada in the Maclean's survey for elite firm hiring in terms of their language. We take the Edmonton definition of large firm, which is 30 plus, and here's where people slot out. So we've got about half the class for the last 3 years going to large firms, about 5 to 6% going into government or public interest, about 5 to 7% working with sole practitioners, and then about 35% going to small firms. The clerkship numbers need to improve, and for those of you who have done well or are in first year and are considering an option, think about a clerkship. There has been some sort of misunderstanding that if you take a clerkship, you're not likely to get an article or you're not likely to finish your articles or land in a firm. Could not be different at all. And we'll have a couple of clerkship sessions later on to actually talk to not only professors who have done it, but people in practice who have been astonished when I tell them that clerkship applications are down. The courts love you. They come in and say, you are very, very well prepared. And this is from the Registrar of the Court of Appeal of British Columbia is actually one of our grads. He's on my new external advisory board, and he's talked about this. Provincial court judges, I met with 2 of them earlier this week. They're coming in to do some special sessions with SLS and otherwise on professionalism, but they said, the clerks that we get are terrific. Queen's Bench, Court of Appeal. it can be a terrific trajectory, whatever you decide to do later on. So don't narrow your options because of some misperception about the impact on clerkships. Destinations are interesting as well. And this reflects a bit of a shift, I think, in terms of people's priorities and also what's going on in the marketplace. It's also guiding some of what I'm doing in terms of trying to create new opportunities with firms, notably in Calgary and especially in Vancouver. 37 of the entering class this year are from Vancouver, so that's 37 of about 180. That's 20% of the incoming class. When they did a survey out of career services, 60 people indicated some interest in working in Vancouver. That's a third of the class. So I'm meeting with a lot of firms out there to make sure, and we're trying to make, we don't control what we don't control, but in terms of actually having Vancouver firms visit, making sure that there are more interview opportunities, trying to align decision points in terms of where the Law Society of Alberta versus the Law Society of BC rules go, we're at least in some dialogue that way. So the pipeline is open there, as well as into Toronto. So you get a bit of a division here. Edmonton has been increasingly important, 60% of the 2015 class. About a decade ago, I'm told, it was basically 50 to 60 Calgary, 30 to 35 Edmonton. So that's actually shifted somewhat. Could reflect people's interest. They come to the U of A, they like Edmonton, they want to stay. No real sort of deeper understanding in terms of the numbers, but we've got at least this information. 10% outside Edmonton and Calgary. I had a conversation with people about rural and small town placements. I attended the CBA's Welcome Barbecue in Red Deer. The CBA is very intent on making sure that students know about opportunities in Red Deer and Grand Prairie, in Fort McMurray and elsewhere. It can actually be a very good practice opportunity for you very quickly if you have an interest, if you've got a background, or to set up your practice. One of our grads in Grand Prairie actually was having difficulty getting an article, ended up with a sole practitioner in Grand Prairie, decided he liked it. 2 years later, the practitioner said, I'm ready for retirement, do you want to buy my practice? In his third year of practice, he was running off his feet, hiring associates, and actually probably making more money than his counterparts in Edmonton. So if you've got an entrepreneurial bent, there is work for you. If you're in criminal law, well, I spoke to a recent graduate at the annual alumni student rugby game, and he was actually shifting his criminal practice up to Fort McMurray, which, sign of a downturn in the economy, criminal law business goes up. So in that respect, at least, there are good opportunities. I'm just saying, there are some opportunities in that respect. Okay, the incoming 3L students, these numbers could be somewhat concerning, but I've been told not to worry, and that historically they're a little slower than elsewhere, but the small town and rural hiring, the sole practitioner hiring that you saw reflected in about the 30-35% of the class doesn't happen until January. So these are people who have secured an article now. It's of the students surveyed, and this was updated on September 25th, so there may have been a bit of a change. Of the 142 responding, 90 people had secured articles, 50 were still looking, and some, and again, it's a case where 28% of them were looking. So there's some flex in there. I'm not sure what the gap is in that regard. What's interesting again is the split. There has been a narrowing of the pipeline in Calgary. So if big firms were hiring 5 last year, they're taking 3 this year. I want to make sure they're all 3 U of A grads. I mean, yes, you love all your children, but some you love more than others. So in that respect, at least, no. In dealing with that, that's the story I'm trying to tell. And we have very good relationships. There traditionally had been a very good pipeline, but there's now increasing competition from not just people from Alberta who have gone to Queen's or Dalhousie or elsewhere, but others who have come from Ontario, been at Ontario schools, and decide that they'd like to work in Calgary because they can see the mountains. They don't realize in the office you see the mountains, you don't get to the mountains, but you see the mountains, at least while you're articling. So, no, it's a great place to live. There are really good opportunities. There is a bit of a slowdown happening right now, and they're getting cautious, but they haven't turned it off completely. So I'm working really hard, and also with our Career Services Office, to make sure that people know about it and that we're really revamping and investing in that area. The Vancouver numbers are not there yet, and we'll see. It ebbs and flows year on year, but again, the Vancouver firms are coming in, and how many of you attended actually the session down at the Shaw Conference Center, that career day? Wasn't that great? I mean, in terms of having at least some access and opportunity to be able to meet with people one-on-one, to find out more information. I have to say as well that it's really important that you're getting the message from me that all choices are important ones. There have been some accusations that, well, we're just large firm focused. Again, as I said, about 50 to 60% of the class traditionally have taken those positions, but there are lots of opportunities elsewhere as well. And we're making sure that we're bolstering how you learn about those opportunities and how we can make sure that we put you in touch with them, because all of them offer, a variety of options and opportunities for you that you may end up wanting to pursue. I was at a meeting last night with a number of lawyers who had worked in big firms here in Edmonton that are in that what I call the sweet spot of 3 to 7 years, where they're sitting back and saying, hey, do I want to do this? One actually transitioned from a corporate practice downtown into a suburban family law practice. Another is taking some time off to go sailing in New Zealand, and then he's going to come back and actually work for not a law firm, but in a larger kind of corporate environment. There are different options and opportunities, and I think one of the things that we can remind you of is get the best experience possible early on. Get a great law degree, start the foundation, and if you practice with a firm for the rest of your career, terrific. But you may have other options and opportunities as well that you want to consider. So in that respect, at least, learn those other skills at this point, and that's where I want to bolster leadership opportunities as well. Again, a split between small and large, an increasing number in government. As government looks at its own budget numbers, that will be a challenge. As I said, I spent 6 years in Sacramento at a time of the downturn in the legal economy, and also the California state government and regulatory agencies were essentially bankrupt. And so there were 3- and 4-year lawyers out who were volunteering to work just to make sure there wasn't a gap. That turned around eventually. So we'll see what happens in terms of government. Part of the reason why I want to really explore experiential learning opportunities is that that's often a really good introduction. I have the Assistant Deputy Minister of Alberta Justice on my Edmonton Advisory Board. He's responsible for supervising 700 lawyers, and they want to help. So that's terrific news, and that's something that actually this fall, I think we're laying the foundation for something different. Okay, there are other numbers. I'll just sort of scroll through these. Calgary Large is, the entirety of the group heading there. Vancouver Large is there. And so this is where people are seeking. There's some overlap in that respect because of people looking in both Edmonton or Calgary or elsewhere. So we'll see what ends up happening. The Toronto number is important. And again, having been in Toronto myself with Mandy Seidenberg, having had Toronto connections very recently, those opportunities will be there and available to you as well. And I've actually constituted an external advisory board in Toronto with both small, medium, and large firms, as well as non-traditional folks. They're wanting to help. There are U of A grads there who have said, nobody's ever contacted us. So we want to make sure that for those of you who are either from Toronto wanting to head back or have an interest and opportunity that way, if you're interested in heading to Toronto, not just to see the Jays, there will be paths for you. I've sort of divided loyalties here. I mean, living in Northern California, the Giants actually won. And so, I remember 92, 93, I'm that old. It's nice to have something to celebrate again. Okay. And this is where people are interested. It's all across the map. All right. I want to talk about development because it's not something I'm looking to you in terms of contributions, but I want you to know about it. Because one of the things I said last year and that I remain tied to is that any kind of faculty like this in any university is modeled on financial support really from 3 different areas. First off, as a public research university, government contributions. Second is equitable tuition, and that's important. And that was part of the dialogue last year. And the third is fundraising. And so fundraising is part of my job. If I'm not in my office a lot, because I'm usually on the road trying to shake the trees, sell my arm, advertising, people aren't buying yet, but we're working on that. Looking at the ways in which moot teams can be sponsored directly. That individuals find that they want to name a scholarship or a bursary after somebody. We had a $100,000 gift from the Odeshaw family this year. There were 5 members of that family are U of A law grads. And a year after the passing of their mother, they wanted to honor her memory and their experience. And so they've donated $100,000 that will actually translate into course prizes in ADR. I finalized a gift from a tax law firm, Moody's Gartner, $100,000, payable over 5 years, that will support the tax moot team as a new sponsor for 5 years at $10,000 a year, and 5 years, $10,000 a year for student research assistantships in tax. So you earn while you learn. It supports the faculty, it supports you. This is a new model. It's not a permanent endowment, but it's something that I'm working on at a time when a lot of the firms are actually pulling back. This is an important number. Alumni participation. For those of you who had gone to schools in the States, this would be an embarrassing number. 5% of our alumni contribute. And I've been trying to find out why. A lot of it is a sense of disengagement. So I'm inviting them to things. Please make them welcome. They want to find out what you're doing. They want to be engaged with you. Even if they give, $100 a year, that's something. And so we look at participation rates. Many of them will give outside the Faculty of Law, and that's great. Many of you and many of them are double U of A grads. And so if you want to support music programs or you have an attachment to Campus Saint-Jean, there's lots of need. And so in that respect, at least, we're all part of the bigger team. But I want people to be thinking about the faculty here as well. And I may be actually looking to you for some help in appealing to the alumni to say, look at what's going on here and how your investment can make a difference. So we'll talk about that a little later in the year. What's interesting in terms of the total numbers, the median annual gift to the law school, individual gift, has been less than $150. We've got some big donors who've contributed a lot of really important gifts and some small ones as well. Organizations, the median annual organization gift, and this includes law firms, sometimes private corporations that are part of law firms as well, has been less than $550 a year. And interestingly as well, more than double the money raised in Edmonton has come from Calgary. So in terms of the contributions that way, I've got some work to do. Of 88 organizations, just over 30 are law firms. So there's some real challenges in that respect. But, with a challenge comes an opportunity. And one of the really good pieces of news is that lots of people like to give to scholarships and bursaries. And so in that respect, at least, we awarded, these are the numbers that were actually awarded through the period. For me, it's a concern because it's flat. Some of that reflects a decrease in what's earned on endowments. So if somebody gives $100,000 to an endowment, it will spin off at sometimes 4% a year. So we would have $4,000 for a scholarship. A lot of those endowment, because it's interest bearing, with interest rates going to almost zero, the return is about 3. So there's lots of money for prizes and awards. The other thing that's really important, and back to that market modifier slide, is what happened in June. And this is where I'm cautiously optimistic, and I've got some good news. I like to finish off on good news. So when the new government was running in the spring, one of their election campaign platform planks was a rollback of all the market modifiers. They got elected. The snowstorm happened in Edmonton the next day. People commented that this is what hell looks like when it freezes over. It's 40 years of, it's not snow, it's 40 years of paper being shredded, you choose. But one of the things that ended up happening at that stage was they did what they said they were going to do. And so they announced very quickly that they were rolling back all the market modifiers. So your humble dean did not sleep in May and June trying to figure out what we were going to do, trying to figure out what my budget was going to be, how we would actually move forward, because a lot of these things that I'm mapping out, really in terms of the front line, are going to affect you and your experience here. There was good news about the third week of June. And it's a bit muted, but there was an announcement that while they were, in my words, pushing the pause button on tuition policy, the way the market modifiers have worked, going back to government for every 5 years for permission to look at the market, it's a bit cockamamie. And I don't know of any other jurisdiction in Canada that actually does it. So they're taking a look for the next 2 years at tuition policy. There was going to be a 1.5% cut across the board to the university. That's been reversed. They've invested an additional 2% across the board at the university, so we're actually getting some additional money that way. And they said to the faculties that had market modifiers, for the period, whether it's 2 years or 3 years, while they undertake the study, we will quote unquote make you whole. So we're not getting the full amount. And I'm doing some battle with the university again because 20% of that cut goes to Central right off the top. In terms of fighting about that 20%, the LSA raised problems last year. The law firms raised problems last year. The Board of Governors heard about it. It's above my pay grade. And so in that respect, at least, there's an investment reasonably to be made about what university services are providing. The 60% for sure is coming to us. I am making the case right now to the provost and others for that additional 20% for student supports. Because I said, look, fine, tuition hasn't gotten up. The rationale or the argument is, well, tuition hasn't gotten up, so you don't need the additional scholarship and bursary money. And I said, heck no. That's fairly direct. I said there are other forms of student support broadly writ that make a difference front line. And so I'm working hard on that right now. The picture's not absolutely finalized, but what I was able to confirm last week is that we will be advertising for 3 new faculty members. So the hiring's going to go on. 3 new full-time tenure stream faculty members to start next July. That's wonderful news. That is fabulous news. And people are saying, well, what areas are you hiring in? Everything. So right now it's unrestricted. I have what is the pattern here is called an advisory selection committee. They are advisory to me. It's made up of professors who are actually elected by their fellow professors. There is a student representative on that committee. As you can appreciate, all of the searching is done in confidence. There may be some lateral candidates who are being considered as well, who are professors elsewhere, who want to put themselves forward. So while I am trying to be as transparent as possible through as much as possible, that one's going to be going on a bit behind closed doors. We will come out with the announcements, and there's always negotiations. A lot of faculties are looking right now, but I'm really confident we'll get some terrific people. My plan had been to hire 9 people, so 3 a year over the next 3 years. I'm hoping we can do that. In terms of the other investments, you've already seen that career services, we've got a second officer. I'm actually working with Robert Bechtel, the new Assistant Dean Administration, who I think is going out to pay for the second round of pizza. Don't say that just yet, hang on. Working with Robert, wave at the back of the room. Robert Bechtel's our new old Assistant Dean Administration who does things like pay for pizza and really makes the ships run, but really in terms of all the student services functions, they report up to him. Robert had actually been Assistant Dean Administration here between 2005 and 2008, and it's great to have him back at the faculty. So we're investing in career services. We're actually looking at repurposing one of the ground floor areas that's actually not used by the graduate students right now as a proper career services center. So that will hopefully be online for next year. Stay tuned. I would like to add some student supports and assistance into career services, so we'll be doing that as well, to try and make sure once things are up and running that we actually have more frontline assistance that, and again, the articling committee told me, I heard it last year, I kind of was aware of it, that people were looking at the University of Calgary Law's website for access to job information. That needs to change. So we're working on a whole bunch of fixes. I sometimes feel like the kid with the, in the dike, sticking fingers in everywhere. One thing at a time in terms of focus, but that's an area that in the LSA survey was a real area of concern and complaint. What I'm hoping is in the next survey later this fall, you'll give us some feedback on some of the changes, particularly those of you who are in the 1L class. We're trying new things. We're trying new things with LRW, with third years who are actually coming back to be research assistants. The course offerings for the upper years, we had to cut quite dramatically the number of sessionals this year and the sessional offerings. It's not where we need to be, it's not where we've been traditionally, but this is in part what the budget looks like, or what the place looks like without a market modifier and without that kind of security. So we're actually trying to get a couple more courses online for January, maybe a bit of a challenge, but to bring back some things. So stay tuned, watch that space, you'll hear from the Vice Dean. In terms of the other areas, as we hire faculty members, there's additional complements coming in. Frontline student services supports in that area as well. You've all heard about the ASSIST program and the psychological counseling and referral services on site. So far, the response has been really good, and what I've heard so far is why only a half day a month? So it's a pilot. It's actually an arrangement and cooperation on a test basis. If things are successful, and we'll gauge it later this fall, I'm hoping we can invest more. So really proud, and I'll finish here. I'm proud of the moot turnout for competition is fantastic, and congratulations to those of you who tried out, never mind getting selected for teams. Clubs Day was phenomenal. The level of involvement and engagement in a whole bunch of things is just terrific. You'll have the opportunities for SLS and for law review and for all of the other things that really make us unique. But I was very proud last Friday to work with the LSA's Mental Health and Wellness Committee, great to have you here, because I'd nominated them for one of the Lieutenant Governor True Awards. And it was really a wonderful ceremony of acknowledgement of their work with mental health and wellness here in the faculty and the faculty's commitment to ensuring, with the CBA and others, a healthier profession. And so in that respect, at least, I'm there. I'm there for as many ceremonies as we can. Professor Ogbogu was honored by the Confederation of Alberta Faculty Associations earlier this month as with their early career award. There's lots to celebrate here. The story, you heard me a year ago, I'm always an optimist. I was a little concerned, I'll admit, But we're on a better trajectory right now, and there are a lot of areas where I know we need better and I know we need more. The LSA survey is very helpful. They've been great in terms of feedback. I'm also glad to hear from you directly. So I've gone on much longer than I promised. The pizza has arrived for those of you who want a second slice or want to duck out. But I'm happy to take some questions at this stage. Really, as I said, I wanted to give you a full update in terms of what was going on, and I'm glad to be available either to the entire group for questions. As I said, I'm going to have to repeat them or afterwards as well. So, over to you, and thank you for coming. Any questions? I can't say why there wasn't more vegetarian, I'm sorry. Okay, hi.
So is the market modifier in effect for next year, like the numbers we saw there, what we can expect?
No. So the question was, is the market modifier in effect for next year? Are the numbers on tuition what we can expect? No. The NDP government has frozen tuition for at least the next 2 years. And so the market modifier did not get passed on to students, but what the government did effectively was say, okay, how much would it have supported? And we will provide you that equivalent in a grant. So the money's coming into the faculty, just not from you. They haven't said, and they've said again, there will be a broad consultation at least for the next couple of years on tuition policy. I think it's reasonable to expect at that point that there may be some parity with Calgary, as a for example. The logic of them being at 12.5 and us not, I've never had it rationally explained to me, so I think there may be an adjustment in a couple of years. But this government has signaled very much that access matters to them, so that's been part of my story as well all along the way, and the reinvestment in bursaries, and frankly my fundraising for additional bursaries, I'm hoping will allow greater opportunities for that kind of support. We've actually been really well served generally by a grant, a $272,000 a year grant from the Alberta Law Foundation that I'm fighting to keep, that has supported over 100 students annually with grants of up to $4,000 apiece. So on a tuition level of 10 grand that people are getting 6 is not inconsiderable when you have living expenses on top, but we've got supplementary supports based on need and otherwise that hopefully will make up some of the difference. Other questions? Are you having a good time so far? I mean, for those of you who have just arrived. I have to say as well, I was really glad that so many of you came to the welcome events back in August. We'll get some feedback directly, but I'm hoping to do them next year. Not everybody could attend, but at least for those who were in Calgary, Vancouver, Toronto, and came in here into the faculty, I hope it was a chance for you to meet before you arrived and form some of those bonds before name your favorite first-year professor started throwing a whole lot of material at you. So in that regard, and again as well, as I talk about alumni engagement, I'm actually taking, work with me on this one, I'm taking Professor Sankoff on the road. So be careful what you wish for. No, it'll be great. In terms of the conversation about Duffy and otherwise, I'm trying to make sure that our professors, amazingly enough, we relaunched our website last year, so we're at 1998. We're hoping to do better and more so we can webcast events that are going on here, that we can connect with more recent alumni, that people come back, or we go downtown. And I want to make sure that if there are those opportunities, you're there and part of them. Other questions? People are getting pizza, they're coming back in. Yes, sir.
What's your national efforts to talk to law firms? Have you done any international stuff? Any connections with law firms?
Sure. The question was, I talked about national efforts to work with law firms. Have I done anything on the international level? I was in London, England in June for an American Bar Association event celebrating the Magna Carta, actually, and we'll get the opportunity to see things here. I've done some work with the ABA in the past, so I was across, and I reached out to our alumni who are based in London. We actually have a graduate who worked for 3 years here in Edmonton, went to the UK, worked for British Gas, worked for BP, be careful, lots of preparation, lots of work for lawyers, and now actually heads Norton Rose's practice in Brazil. And so he invited me along after a short meeting to stay for their energy conference. So Norton Rose worldwide, through the Canadian conduit or otherwise. I will be in New York. I'm actually presenting at Fordham in October. I'm actually meeting with a group of our alumni who are in firms there to see what opportunities are there either for summer hiring or for longer term positions. So for those of you who are interested internationally, that's also where my American experience can hopefully come in. Whether it's New York and California are the two that are easiest, quote unquote, for foreign graduates to go into because of the ways in which their state bars work. They also tend to be the two most difficult state bars to pass. But we'll look at, if there's interest as well, trying to bring in, and there hasn't been the demand, prep courses for those on site. It happens in Toronto. Most people and most of my students in the States, even after getting an American JD, would do kind of 2 months of cram school between May and July before they would write the state bar exam. So as a prerequisite to that, I'll put together a session, I appreciate the suggestion, about American opportunities, and then internationally in London and otherwise, see what's there. Often they will want you to have 2 to 3 years of experience in a Canadian firm. You know, do mostly corporate, because that will translate most readily, not necessarily litigation, but there are litigation opportunities as well. So we have a wide international network. It hasn't been tapped into, so I'm trying to do that as best I can, one step at a time. And I'm happy to put you in touch with people as well. If there are individual queries or there's an area where you want to work, either through career services or otherwise, feel free to email me directly. My exploding inbox will continue to explode, so give me a little bit of time to get back to you, but I'm happy to work with you on trying to facilitate those arrangements. Anything else? We'll be watching this space very carefully in the next month. One of the things I met with, very briefly across the room, the new Attorney General yesterday. I've not yet met with the new Minister of Education. There are a couple of messages that I think are really important to send. From last year's experience, that students supported increased investments here and were prepared to make that themselves. So, you know, not everybody's going to sign up for increased tuition. And I understand that. I paid my own way through. I was on scholarships and bursaries, I took on debt, didn't come from a family of lawyers, so I get it, and want to make sure, personally, that there is equitable tuition in that regard. But I think one of the messages I sent last year was access is important, but access to what? And if you don't have the excellence in education, if you don't have the foundation here, if you don't have the courses you need, if you don't have the access to the excellent professors, then there's no point. And so in that respect, at least, the other part of the message is that you are all important for access to justice in this province. I noted that 35% will end up directly in solar small firms. Those are often providing frontline services to individuals in need. There's a lot of low income and pro bono work that's being done as well. So we need to be part of the solution. Many of you are part of that solution already while you're here, through SLS, through the Edmonton Community Legal Clinic, through other work that you're doing. That work remains important. We need to remind the public of the important work that's being done to support justice in this province, and you're all part of that solution. It's a message that I'm trying to carry forward on every level. I'd welcome your support in doing that as well, and that's a completely nonpartisan pitch. And I don't care flavor of government. I'm happy to talk to any stripe. I note from this morning, actually, there's an interesting panel being put together from the Center of Constitutional Studies, I think on October 15th, on the what if check mark, you know, what do you do in that kind of context. Again, completely nonpartisan federally, completely nonpartisan provincially. We need to make sure that the message is heard by the public at a time of constrained resources, at a time when people are wanting investments in healthcare and education, when there's less revenue coming into government because of the downturn in the economy and a lot of people hurting, that this remains an important investment in a very important array of investments. So in that respect, at least, as I said, from June, it's good news. I'm hoping that continues. Any other questions? I will stick around afterwards if you want to ask one-on-one. I'm not sure how much is left. I saw the raid. It's gone. Okay, well. Those of you who are fans of Peanuts Christmas, do you remember when they actually go and decorate Snoopy's doghouse? You know, the entire crowd kind of goes around and then hovers and then it's all decorated, sort of like that. In any event, thank you all very much for coming. Thank you for the work that you're doing to make sure that this place stays as alive and engaged a community as I know that it's been and that I know that you're committed to. So thank you all very much for your help and for coming. Appreciate it.